Hi, my name is Eleanor Tatum, and I'm the publisher and editor-in-chief of the New York Amsterdam News. The coronavirus crisis has brought serious distress to local economies and advertising along with them. The New York Amsterdam News has partnered with the Local Media Association during this unprecedented crisis. Help us continue our important work in chronicling the life of Black New Yorkers, and consider making a donation to the COVID-19 Local News Fund today. Go to givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Again, that is givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Thank you and stay safe.
It's Thursday, July 16th, and welcome to the New York Amsterdam News Podcast. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. On this week's episode, my guest is anti-violence advocate Iesha Sekou, who is the founder and CEO of the Harlem-based nonprofit organization Street Corner Resources. She's going to be speaking with me about the recent violence that has been plaguing the city. As the wave of violence in New York City continues, some neighborhoods saw several shootings this week. The NYPD says they are responding to up to 18 shootings in one night. The death of a toddler set an alarm of awareness of just how bad violence is in the city. On July 12th, 1-year-old DeVell Gardner Jr. was just 2 months shy of his second birthday when his life was taken by gunfire outside of a park in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. This comes as funeral services are held this week for 17-year-old high school basketball star Brandon Hendrick Ellison, who was fatally shot in the Bronx. And we welcome you to this episode of our podcast, and we're so pleased to have Iesha Sekou from Street Corner Resources in Harlem with me this week to break down what is going on with this violence as we face these tragedies. Iesha has been such a pillar in the community. She's been on the forefront of the fight against gun violence, and I've known her for many years, and I've seen her organization grow over those years that I've been at the New York Amsterdam News. She's actually been doing something called Occupy the Corners for a long time, and she's going to be talking with us about that here shortly, just to kind of give us an idea of how she's what she's doing to combat the violence that's going on. Well, it is Thursday, and the paper did come out today, and I have several stories that I do want to go over with you. Our front page story this week is our continuing coverage of the outbreak of violence that's been going on in the city. We spoke to several people about the situation, including retired NYPD detective Marcus Claxton, activist Kevin Barron, and Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams on what they think about the situation and possible solutions. We also have a story about the recent clash between Black Lives Matter protesters and Blue Lives Matter protesters in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn last weekend. Several dozen Black Lives Matter protesters showed up to counter-protest a Blue Lives Matter rally. Guarded by police, the Blue Lives protesters hurled insults and other choice words at Black Lives protesters, leading to a violent clash. And in our arts and entertainment section, we highlight playwright Katori Hall's new drama, P-Valley, that premiered July 12th on Starz. The scripted series is about the lives of exotic dancers working in the Mississippi Delta. And we hope that you can go on newsstands and pick up the newspaper. Just do it safely. Or you can check out these stories online at amsterdamnews.com. Well, my guest this week is Iesha Sekou, who is the founder and CEO of the Harlem-based organization Street Corner Resources. She's with me to discuss the recent wave of violence in the city, along with her organization's work with youth in the community. Welcome to the podcast, Iesha. How are you?
Absolutely marvelous this morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much. Well, first, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I do want to talk to you and get your thoughts on the recent wave of violence that has been going on in the city. We saw the tragic death of a 1-year-old toddler who was shot in Brooklyn outside of a park. And then, of course, we saw the funeral yesterday for 17-year-old high school basketball star Brandon Hendrick Ellison, who was shot in the Bronx. Give us your thoughts on what you're seeing and what you think is going on.
You know, anytime that there's an uptick in violence, it concerns me. So I could say I'm having a marvelous day, but a mother who lost a 1-year-old child is not. And so with the violence that we see, we usually see a small surge in violence during the summer months, because people are coming out of their homes. They've been, in the house throughout the fall and the winter, and now people are coming out, and people who had beef see each other. But this recent uptick is a lot higher than we expected to see in such a short period of time. And I think that's what's significant about this uptick in violence, right? So my feeling about it is, I have enormous concern because people usually wind up, people who are like shooters and people who are in trauma usually are infected by the amount of violence. So we'll have people who kind of piggyback on, oh, they're shooting in Brooklyn, so now we start shooting and stabbing in the Bronx. And so we're seeing kind of an infectious effect happening where violence is concerned. Just last night, we had a young man who was slashed in his face and had 30 stitches in his face. This was just last night. I also got a call after that, after responding to the hospital and finding out that the young man was okay. I got a call from a judge who had a young man who was 15 years old who had a gun charge. So, and although his violent act was really sticking someone up and no one was shot, the thing is that there are too many guns and there's too much of an uptick in such a short period of time, not just in Harlem, but across the city. And that's of grave concern for me. It's just very unsettling. It means that we have to take some immediate actions to interrupt this violence.
Mm. All right. And one of the things you were mentioning to me is that the number of violent incidents that we're seeing during this time kind of mirrors what we saw in the 90s. Tell us about, can you elaborate a little more on that? I mean, you've been in the community for a long time. You've seen the different phases of different violent waves. Tell us about how this is mirroring another time.
Well, during the 90s, there were a lot of beefs that started in public housing, right? A lot of them were people coming against each other in public housing, and gangs, it was the Bloods and the Crips and the Ieshas and, different groups coming against each other. And so we saw a lot of gang beef, right? So there was a lot of shooting, people running from one project to another, and just shooting back and forth. And so now what we're seeing, and there was a good number of, a bad number really, of homicides. So we're beginning to see that again. We're beginning to see that gangs are coming against gangs. When we saw the baby shot and murdered, 30 shots fired. 30 shots fired is a lot of firepower. It either states that there is one more than one gun or one very high ammunition gun because of the number of shell casings on the ground. So this is kind of reminiscent of what was happening in the early 90s on into 2000 with all of the shooting and homicides that were going on.
Okay. And I want you to elaborate further. You and I had a conversation this week for the article that I wrote about the violence in the city. And I think people need to know how a lot of this violence is getting started. And you told me that a lot of it is over beefs that have not been settled, a lot of situations that have not been settled. And I want you to elaborate further on how that's working in the community and where a lot of this violence, how this is all starting, how a lot of this is starting, rather, I should say.
Mm-hmm. On how the violence starts?
Yes.
Okay. So, I wish it were as simple as sometimes as the way that people who are not involved in this work may see it, but it's not any one particular way. This violence really starts even before the people are involved in the violence. So I always say the trigger is pulled long before the trigger is pulled. What does that mean? That means that there are things that are systemic to this violence. There are things that incubate and create or make it so that violence could happen. And so some things may seem very simple, and if taken care of early, could help to remedy violence in our community. One, the lack of jobs, a lack of employment in our community. We see when people don't have a way to eat and pay their rent and pay their bills, they begin to have they may begin to sell drugs, and then they have turf, and then they have to protect the turf, and they have to protect the drug dealing that goes on, right? So in order to do that, they have to have a weapon. And when you have a weapon, you're often called to use it. because you have to protect the turf. So see, not having a job can be built on, right? And it becomes more and more engaging, or more of a call to be engaged in violence. Because of small things, it can grow and become the thing that ignites violence. So things like not having employment, poor education, not being educated, not being able to qualify for a job, right? Not only that, people not having proper housing. So what happens with housing? Housing plays a big part, because when young people live in a house or in a community, it is where the family is not able to sustain themselves, can easily be evicted. When those kids are evicted, like we saw in the 90s, people living in welfare hotels and all of that, right? We also saw a resurgence in gang violence, because young people that began to live in gang houses. Living in a gang house means that you have to do gang-like things. So if they need you to go take care of some unfinished business, the gun could easily be put in your hand. They tell you, well, you live in this house, you got to go and do X, Y, and Z. And sometimes that's taking a life, or shooting someone, or being involved in a robbery, or what have you. So, and that would be something that comes from not having a solid place to live. So education, employment, housing is all connected to the violence that we see. Are we seeing that now? Yes. Young people have been quarantined with their families, and probably with other families in the same household, because in most of these households there are more than one family living in a 2-bedroom apartment. So you have people on the couch, you have people sleeping in the tub, you have people stacked up in the bedroom, and usually during normal times they're not all here all in the apartment at the same time. But because of COVID, they are doubled up, tripled up, and because they're being quarantined, are in the same house at the same time. So we see that those things lead to violence too. Sometimes family violence, because now they begin to argue about who's in the space, who's bringing money in, who's not, who works, who doesn't. And of course, we see violence as a result of that. Sometimes people who are living in those apartments like that, stacked up, are forced to go out and get some money and bring it back, which means they may be involved in some other things. So that create violence as well. So the violence comes from a lot of places. Oftentimes, and I'll tell you, last night when we saw the young man who was cut in his face, he wound up with 30 stitches. That was over a crap game. And for people who may not know, your listeners may not know what a crap game is. It's shooting dice, gambling for money, and it is deemed illegal in New York City, okay? But is allowed to go on all around the city. So last night, a young man was cut in his face. The other night, there was a big fight, an argument over a crap game. And a month and a half ago, a very young man, I think he was like 19 or 20, or so, his name is Gio, was murdered in a crap game. You understand?
Yes.
So these illegal gambling games, and usually people are of the same set, crew, gang, and they're shooting dice, and other people come to shoot dice with them in the hopes of making some money. But some people do what they call ass bet. Ass bet means that you are actually betting your money, betting money you don't have.
Oh, wow.
And that's like an insult to the people who have money, who are gambling, because if you ass bet, meaning you don't have money, then you're winning people's money but not really having any money. And that usually ends up with someone beat up, stomped out, maybe cut up, or shot. Okay. And so that's what's been driving some of these shootings. People think it's all gang related. It's not.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the things you told me about is that people are seeing each other for, again, you were saying that some people are seeing each other out for the first time in a while at some of these barbecues, block parties, different events, and they're settling scores that way. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know you said it wasn't gang related, but a lot of people, there might have been something that happened years ago or even months ago, and people are now seeing people that they know who did something and they're resolving
Right.
issues that way.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That happens very often. Oftentimes, there are beefs that are unsettled, and a beef is like a disagreement between two people or two gangs or groups or blocks or people who live in certain buildings. Beefs can happen, from different levels, right? Sometimes it's block against block. It's project building against another project building, corner against corner, gang against gang. So when people have these beefs, oftentimes they're not resolved, and that's what Street Corner Resources does as part of the crisis management system. We have violence interrupters who go out to interrupt this kind of beef before it gets to violence. We try to de-escalate the beef. But there are sometimes so many, you can't get to them all, and we only have sites in certain areas.
Okay.
So people oftentimes leave and they go away or they go to jail. They get locked up for something else. And so the beef may just kind of be quiet. It may be quiet because the other people are not available to keep it going, meaning to beat each other up, shoot at each other, or what have you. And then you have the person who's released from prison. Mm-hmm. And upon the release from prison, usually the community knows that person is home, and then they go on a block or a corner or the project building, and next thing you know, you see shooting, oftentimes open fire. Just depends on who's behind the gun. Mm. So that's how some beefs start. And some beefs have been going on. This is the crazy part about it to me, is that there are beefs that have been going on for 25 years, 20 years. And when you ask young people, I often think about like Grant houses, and I can't think of the other house that's right near there. It's Niger Development. And they've been beefing so long that they don't even remember what the beef is. Mm. Like the younger kids, when you say, why are you beefing? They say, we just don't like them. They don't even know where the beef started. They just know that it's been the tradition for them to be in disagreement and disharmony and shoot at each other and beat each other up.
Wow. One thing I do want you to talk about is the Occupy the Corners. You've been doing that for quite some time. And, of course, last weekend, Mayor de Blasio, his wife, Chirlane McCray, and State Senator Brian Benjamin were with you during the Occupy the Corners. Tell us what Occupy the Corners is exactly and what it does for the community.
Yes. So Occupy the Corners was started by Street Corner Resources somewhere around 2006, 2005. I can't remember exactly what our day was to start, but we just said that we're going out into the community to have a presence. I remember Pastor Williams used to call it a presence for peace. We called it Occupy the Corners, or that we were just going to go out and occupy the block or what have you. And but it took on the name. The name that stuck was OTC, Occupy the Corners. And so we would just go out, talk to the community, engage young people. And the effort was to engage those that were engaging in violence and find out ways to get them and keep them away from violence, to have some meaningful conversation or interaction that would get their attention. We could support them with education, employment, training, other resources, and say, hey, look, we want to help you. We want to get you a job. MTA is hiring, or this one is hiring, and share those resources. But what we found was young people were open to that. A lot of them were. And the moment you take them out of the mix, you begin to see a reduction in violence, because if those people who are involved in the violence are away from their block, at work or in school or engaged in a training, they were not available to be involved in violent acts. And we would see a reduction. And so the Occupy the Corners was just that, to kind of just find out, keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening, what are the beefs, who's beefing with who. People come up and tell you a lot of things. The folks in the community talk. And so it was about getting the community to talk to each other, the business owners, just like when we were out there the other day with the mayor. The mayor asked if I was still doing Occupy. We have not stopped. Our team, as part of their canvas, occupies on a weekly basis, and sometimes more than that. Can you turn the volume on that phone down? So we are out in the community. We even occupied during COVID, giving out masks and gloves and just showing up in different neighborhoods. Sometimes we do what we call, for the occupied, quick hits, which means that on the quick hits, you might just occupy an area for 20, 30 minutes and move to another block and another block, just kind of feeling the pulse. But we were also giving out the mask and gloves and just trying to make sure that we made contact with people. And then some days we get in a hardened area and we know that shootings been happening, and we just get on that block and we just stay. And sometimes they tell us, you're making our block hot. No, you made your block hot because you had a shooting or a stabbing or a slashing, and now we have to show up, and we have to call the community to show up. Okay. So we're going to do an Occupy the corners on the street where the young man was cut in his face. And hopefully we can get a reduction in the activity that's taking place over there.
All right. One of the things I do want to talk to you about, I want you to talk about, is Street Corner Resources does a lot of activities and has a lot of things for young people in the community. I want you to talk about that, particularly with Peace Cafe. I know that's something that you do to allow the young people, kids, to be able to express themselves creatively through poetry, through music. Tell us about that.
Right. So we're really excited about the Peace Cafe. The Peace Cafe is an initiative that we started about almost 5 years ago now. And we started that initiative to engage the community, to bring people together, to let young people and older people, kind of a mix-up of community folk, just getting together to make music, do poetry. We even have folks who show up. They bring, if they're an author, they bring their book, and they read an excerpt from their book. They may even, offer copies of it to the audience or what have you. And the thing is we sometimes don't know what to expect. What we do know is our call is that everything has to be positive, clean. There's no negative associations to people, no N-word, no B-word, none of that. Just good, wholesome entertainment. We had one guy show up, and it was just so nice. He showed up with a saw. And he was an older guy, had to be like over 75.
Okay.
And he had a saw and a string or something, and he played the saw.
Oh.
He actually made music with this old rusty-looking saw, and it was actually an instrument. And what it reminded me of when I first went to college in Tallahassee, Florida, and it was Juneteenth, and folks pulled out these old drums and banjos and things, and homemade banjos and instruments. And that's what he had. Yeah. And it was amazing. And the thing that, and this is why we have the Peace Cafe, it gets people talking to each other. All of the young kids wanted to know, like, how did you learn to do that? How do you make that? Like, where'd you get that idea from? And he told the story of how in his family, all the way back, I guess, into slavery, they played the saw or something similar. So the Peace Cafe is a mix-up of talent and presentation and laughter and fun. We have comedy. We have folks come in and do jam sessions that never met each other. We have a backyard, beautiful backyard that we plant up with flowers. Our community benefit partner, Ken, has been fantastic. He gave us that space, and we fixed that space up. Okay. And we made it into a cafe. It also doubles as a workshop space, and young people have the opportunity to use. We made a music studio there that we built ourselves, and there's a music booth, and there's Mac computers, and young people can make beats and raps and songs and go in the booth and record. So, and then we have cameras and guitars and drums. There's instruments there. So it's you have to really come out to it. I think you would enjoy when we have the Peace Cafe.
Absolutely.
And we cook out in the backyard. That's the other thing. We'll open up the backyard all the way up until around October. Okay. I think last time we stayed open until November, and just kind of had the door open. But in the backyard is where we throw up the grill. We have some candles burning, and it's just really, really peaceful. We have a waterfall back there. The young people have planted tomatoes and basil and lavender and collard greens, and we have flowers, and all of those things are growing. So it's really a nice thing. We do have some other services I'd like to be able to tell people about. We have legal aid for those that may need help with legal problems. We offer free legal help for people within our community. We also have counseling. We have 2 credible messenger counselors that are available. They're go-to people. They're not sitting in here with formal suits on, but they're licensed social workers. And if someone walks in and they say, hey, I'm just having a bad day, my child died last year or what have you, they have people that they can come and talk to. Or if they're just experiencing depression or trauma or crisis and they just need an ear, they can come in and talk with our counselor. We have the mobile trauma unit, too, where we take all of our resources to the streets, the legal, the open mic, everything. And we can recruit people. We can share information. We can help them with employment because we have an employment specialist that's with us. So we're just excited about the opportunities that we have. And then, of course, we have the youth anti-gun violence youth employment program where young people are on payroll. And they get paid to be with us. And then most recent, to the credit of our Mayor Bill de Blasio, we have the social distancing program. Street Corner Resources was giving out masks and gloves. This is about our 18th week and going into the 19th week during COVID. And so Mayor de Blasio, in turn, turned around, gave us masks at first, about 20, 30,000 masks. And then he said, you know what, let me put a contract with this because you guys are doing what people are not doing what really needs to happen in the city. And so now we have a social distancing team that goes into the community and supports community activity and engagement, but shows people how to do that in a safe way during this time with masks, with staying 6 feet apart and not infecting each other in order to reduce the spread of COVID-19.
Right. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast for this episode. We really appreciate it. I know I've seen you do wonderful work over the years with Street Corner Resources, and it's grown so much. And so we definitely applaud you for the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Josh, for always being supportive. I mean, there never has been a time that you have not supported. So we really here at Street Corner Resources appreciate that. Much success to you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Peace and blessings.
That concludes this week's podcast. You can pick up the latest edition of the New York Amsterdam News on newsstands and get updates online at amsterdamnews.com. You can also keep up with us on Facebook at NY Amsterdam News and follow us on Twitter at NYAmNews. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. Thanks for listening.
Hi, my name is Eleanor Tatum, and I'm the publisher and editor-in-chief of the New York Amsterdam News. The coronavirus crisis has brought serious distress to local economies and advertising along with them. The New York Amsterdam News has partnered with the Local Media Association during this unprecedented crisis. Help us continue our important work in chronicling the life of Black New Yorkers and consider making a donation to the COVID-19 Local News Fund today. Go to givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Again, that is givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Thank you and stay safe.